Hunters, your attention.
That is right, ladies and gentlemen. Fatalis has been confirmed as Title Update 5. The big baddie himself is coming to Iceborne. Now, in today's video, I wanted to talk about Fatalis and how the encounter went in GU, as well as take a look at a set that I would recommend going into this encounter with, just to be a little bit better prepared. Now, back in GU, Fatalis was a multiplayer-only fight. I mean, you could try and solo him, but you had to fight him in the G-Rank hub. And the arena we're fighting him in is also going to be making a return in Iceborne, Castle Shrouder. I don't even know if I pronounced that right, but that's what the German pronounced thing told me to say. So anyway, the arena should have access to things like Dragonator, cannons, ballistas. Particularly the ballistas are super useful here because we should have access to one-shot binders. Those are the same things that we used to pin Velkhana down back in the campaign. And so those should be useful here just to help pin this guy on down and give you a chance to get some damage in. Now, as for getting damage in, his weak spot is going to be his head. In particular, his head is very, very weak to Dragon Element, which makes sense because just prior to this, they gave us Alatreon, who came with some of the best dragon weapons we have ever seen. They have tons of purple sharpness, they have tons of Dragon Element, and in my opinion, I think they're going to be basically the best in slot weapons for this fight. So if you've managed to beat Alatreon, which you actually have to beat Alatreon to even fight Fatalis, make sure that you have one of those weapons set up, because that weapon is going to be a huge boon going into this encounter. Now, as for the fight itself, and given this could change drastically, Alatreon changed drastically between GU and World. There's a good chance Fatalis will also. But I do think there's a couple things that's pretty iconic with this monster that are probably going to return, and I wanted to touch on those. Now, probably first and foremost, the most important thing is Fatalis has two main stances when he's fighting. He's either going to be up on his hind legs, or he's going to be down on all fours. And depending on what stance he's in, also dictates what attacks he's going to do. When he's up on his hind legs, he'll do a big slam that you just saw there. He'll also stand up and spit out fireballs. Beyond that, he'll do a tail swipe, and all of these attacks can be very devastating, but they are all very telegraphed. When he's on his hind legs in general, I'd suggest just kind of staying right around his back legs and getting in some damage. If you're a gunner, try and get behind him and shoot through the length of his body. If you're really skilled, jump up in the air and hit him in the head with an insect glaive or something. Now, when he's down on all fours, I actually think he's a little bit more dangerous. Down on all fours, you can stay kind of right up on the body or by his front legs or his back legs. If his head's low enough, you can try to go for the head. But in general, I'd suggest waiting for knockdowns before trying to hit the head, just because if he ends up biting you or something, it's going to chunk you for a massive amount of your health. Now, the two biggest things he used to do when he was down on all fours were he had this paused lunge attack, where he would lunge at you, pause for a moment, and then lunge as like a follow-up. And what was deadly about this is if you got hit by the first part of the lunge, you were going to get knocked down, and then the follow-up attack from the lunge is usually going to hit you as well. And that was very, very capable of carting a lot of hunters. So definitely something to keep in mind. Beyond that, he also has access to this flamethrower attack, which you've seen him use a couple times so far in the video. And the flamethrower in particular was so devastating because not only was the damage very high, but the range of this attack. We're talking like a 270-degree angle. He would cover almost the entire arena in flame. So if you weren't right on his legs or behind him already, there's a chance that this thing was just going to cook you. And even in decent gear, like the set that I'm wearing right here, I want to say had like 10 to 15 fire resist and was fully upgraded, and the flamethrower attack would still chunk me for about 50% of my health. So you can imagine the kind of damage it would do if you were in, say, Velkhana gear where you had negative fire defense. Now, beyond that, the one thing that I'm not sure how they're going to change it, but he does have an ultimate attack where he would fly up in the air and then start spitting out fireballs and eventually spit out like a big one, big old explosion. And anyway, the point is we have seen ultimate attacks scale up to be just these ridiculous spectacles in Iceborne. Thinking about things like the Safi laser, the Raging Brachydios explosion, the Ascaton Judgment from Alatreon. And I'll be damned if Fatalis isn't going to have some crazy move where he jumps up in the sky and basically cooks everybody. Now, whether we just have to survive this outright or hide behind something or meet a DPS check, that'll be discovered come launch. I don't know how they're going to change it, but you can bet all your palicos that he is going to have some kind of crazy aerial fire explosion type thing that will probably end up carding a bunch of people. Now, in terms of how to fight this guy, honestly, my recommendation is going to be speedy weapons, things like the dual blade, or bow guns. Any weapon is certainly viable. I plan on using dual blades against him in particular, and that's actually the build I'm going to be covering in this video. You can probably adapt that to a bunch of other Blade Master style weapons, so the build I'll showcase will be good for things like sword and shield, for things like longsword. You know, even if you want to play, say, Savage Axe Charge Blade, it could probably work with that as well. But anyway, Bowgun was really, really effective against him in the past. I imagine it would be here as well. Pierce Ammo in particular, just because of how big this guy is, will absolutely just shred through him. But, you know, any weapon works here, especially because of how weak his head is. If you're playing something like Hammer or Greatsword, getting a couple of hits in on his head is going to be absolutely devastating. So probably the biggest thing is just making sure that you're prepared going into this fight. You know, don't go into it with gear that is negative on the fire resist. Don't go into it with your gear not augmented. There's a reason that this fight is going to be gated behind Alatreon, and it's because they are making sure that anybody that is even attempting this thing is going to be decked out, because it is going to be, without a doubt, the hardest fight that we have had in Worm. Some closing remarks on Fatalis. I think I mentioned that his tail is like super hard, so most attacks will bounce off the tail. On top of that, staying on it is kind of risky just because his tail swipes will chunk you, so just be careful around the tail. Beyond that, always try to stay kind of close to his body. His back legs are probably going to be the safest spot. And then I'm guessing they'll probably make a return to this as well, but back in GU, you could actually carve him a bunch of times. I want to say it was 9 carves. I think it was like 3 in the body, 3 in the chest, 3 in the head. And I'd imagine we'll see something like that return as well, where you can get multiple carves on him. So definitely something to keep in mind. Now on to the main purpose of the video. It's taking a look at a recommended set, because we want folks to be as prepared as possible for this fight. Now I personally plan on using dual blades, but you could easily adapt this set to sword and shield, to longsword, to insect glaive. Really any of the bladed weapons will probably work incredibly well with this set. And we have 100% affinity here, we have a lot of damage, and more importantly, we have a lot of survivability. Especially we have evade window 3, we have health boost 3, we have fire resist and dragon resist, so we're covered on both sides. Comparing this build up against a meta dual blade build, for example, as you can see, our raw is going to be 712 compared to 766. Our effective element is 110 compared to 150 because we're losing access to LE crit, but our fire resist is 37 compared to 0. And with a meta set, we're negative dragon resist, whereas here I think we're at like 27 or something. Now, given dragon was an element in 4, I don't know if it's going to return. Regardless, it doesn't matter. It comes with the gear and we're covered. And honestly, I think that this is going to be a much more comfortable set to fight Fatalis with, because at the end of the day, a dead hunter does no DPS. So if you're top tier, just run meta. If you're not, like 90% of us, run something like this. You're still going to have respectable damage here. I mean, those are not numbers to sneeze at, you know. 712 and 110, along with as much defense as we have, is a very, very comfortable setup. And I think especially for fighting what is the pinnacle of Elder Dragons, I think having something like this is going to be a huge boon to a lot of players. So either way, that is going to wrap things up for this one, keeping it short and sweet. Obviously, we are going to be fighting this guy as soon as he comes out in October, and we'll be streaming it as well and running groups and helping people take on down the big old beast. But either way, that is going to close things out for me. So thanks for tuning on in. Hopefully this video helps a couple of y'all prepare for the encounter. And otherwise, I'll see you all come October.